Hey guys, tonight we're going back to the centuries before modern bathrooms to explore how people kept themselves clean when every basin had to be filled by hand, every warm wash depended on fuel, and the nearest thing to a shower might have been a determined person holding a jug. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine the quiet hours drawing to a close as the first pale light reaches across old floorboards. The room is cool, the fire has burned low, and on a small wooden stand rests a basin beside a waiting ewer. There is no tiled room and no gleaming chromium handle, only carried water, folded cloth, and the steady rhythm of an older morning. Chapter 1. A basin before the day begins. In many historical households across different eras and regions, waking up did not involve stepping into a tiled room to turn a gleaming chromium handle. Instead, the morning began with stillness, shadow, and the quiet weight of carried water. To understand how people managed cleanliness before modern bathrooms, we must step outside any sweeping narrative of universal filth or uninterrupted progress. Pre-modern life was remarkably diverse, shaped deeply by climate, local geography, social station, and access to fuel and natural resources. Wealthy households in stone townhouses, rural farming families in timber cottages, and urban artisans in crowded tenements all faced distinct realities, utilizing the tools and traditions available to their specific station and place. The idea of being clean carried meanings that shifted according to context. Words like clean, fresh, and sanitary did not possess the strict microbial definitions we rely upon today. In many settings, bodily care was governed by ideas of balance, seasonal adaptation, social respectability, and the practical removal of visible soil or unpleasant odors. While some societies placed immense cultural value on daily partial ablutions, others approached full-body immersion with caution, or reserved it for specific communal and ritual occasions. Recognizing this nuance helps us move past common historical myths, painting a picture that is neither uniformly pristine nor carelessly neglected, but rather grounded in the everyday realities of ordinary existence. In a modest urban home in early modern Europe, for instance, the morning routine frequently began before the sun was fully up. The room might be cool, holding the damp chill of the night. Before any work could begin, someone in the household had to address the most fundamental requirement of morning hygiene: water. Because water did not flow from internal pipes, it arrived through the physical labor of carrying. A ceramic or metal ewer, or perhaps a simple wooden bucket, would be filled from a courtyard well, a street conduit, or a neighborhood fountain, often the previous evening or during the first trip outside at dawn. This carried water was precious, treated with a thrift born of the effort required to haul it upward through stairwells or across courtyards. With a modest quantity of water secured in the bedchamber or the common room, the morning face and hand wash commenced. This was rarely a lavish splash or an immersive soak, but rather a deliberate, targeted cleaning of the exposed parts of the body that met the world: the face, the hands, and sometimes the neck. In many households, a basin sat upon a small wooden washstand, accompanied by a clean linen cloth. The water might be used cold as it came from storage, or, if the household possessed a hearth already warming for the morning meal, a small portion of heated water from a kettle might be added to take off the sharpest chill. This practice of small, targeted washing served several practical purposes. Hands that would soon handle bread, textiles or tools needed to be cleared of the accumulated dust and residue of sleep and night labor. The face, similarly exposed to soot from indoor hearths and the general dust of living spaces, was refreshed to start the day. Yet, the method and frequency of this morning wash varied widely depending on who was washing and where they lived. An apprentice in a bustling workshop might share a basin in a courtyard with fellow laborers, using coarse soap and rough linen. A noble resident in a grand estate might have warm water brought directly to a private chamber by a domestic servant, pouring it into a silver or fine pewter basin. Meanwhile, in rural households where water had to be hauled from a distant spring or well, water conservation was paramount, and morning routines were necessarily brief and economical. It is important to recognize that these routines were not signs of indifference toward personal care, but rather adaptations to a world where water was heavy, fuel for heating was costly, and indoor plumbing was absent from most ordinary households, despite older or privileged exceptions. The physical act of washing was integrated directly into the daily chores of lighting fires, sweeping floors, and preparing meals. The cloth used might be simple coarse linen or woven hemp, chosen for durability rather than luxury, rinsed out afterward and hung to dry near the hearth so it would be ready for the next day's dawn. Beyond the immediate household, this morning reliance on carried water reflected a broader network of shared communal resources. In many towns and cities, neighbors gathered around public spouts or wells long before the marketplace opened, exchanging quiet greetings while filling their vessels. This shared labor created a distinct social space around water collection, where the rhythm of the morning was mediated by the capacity of the local source. In drier climates or during prolonged winter freezes, when wells ran low or pipes iced over, these volumes diminished further, forcing households to prioritize drinking and cooking over washing, and reminding everyone involved of their absolute dependence on external environmental conditions. The architectural layout of domestic spaces further reinforced these habits of economy and care. Furniture pieces designed specifically for morning ablutions, such as washstands featuring integrated shelves for ewers, basins, and small soap dishes, were carefully crafted to keep everything contained within a compact footprint. In homes lacking specialized furniture, simple benches or table corners served the same purpose, demonstrating how material culture adapted to limited space and resources. Every element of the morning setup was chosen for utility and durability, ensuring that the necessary tools of personal maintenance could withstand daily handling without requiring replacement. Furthermore, the sensory experience of this early ritual was shaped by the atmosphere of the room itself. Before the fires were stoked to full flame, the air carried the scent of cooling embers from the night before mingled with the faint freshness of linen stored in wooden chests. The sounds were muted, the soft scrape of a wooden bucket against stone, the gentle slosh of liquid poured into a ceramic bowl, and the quiet rustle of cloth against skin. These small sensory details anchored individuals to the present moment, providing a steady, tactile transition from sleep to wakefulness that crossed boundaries of wealth and social status. As generational knowledge passed down through households, young children learnt these foundational hygiene habits by observing older family members pour water and wipe their hands, embedding personal maintenance into the bedrock of domestic life. These traditions varied subtly from region to region, reflecting local climates and the availability of specialized earthenware containers. Across different provincial towns, master artisans and craft guilds often maintained specific customary guidelines regarding the upkeep of shared workspace washing areas, ensuring that collective hygiene standards matched the moral and social expectations of their trade communities. As the morning progressed and the initial household tasks were set in motion, the used water remained sitting quietly in the basin. It held the faint traces of ash, dust, and sleep, waiting to be emptied. But before that water could be discarded, one naturally has to wonder where such a steady volume of liquid came from in the first place, and what intricate human or mechanical effort was required to bring it within reach of the washstand before the day even truly began. Chapter 2. Water had to arrive somehow. To answer how a household secured that steady volume of liquid for the morning basin, we must trace the complex journeys water undertook before it ever crossed a threshold. Long before the convenience of indoor piping, obtaining water was an active, deliberate undertaking that shaped the daily routines of towns, villages, and great estates alike. Water did not merely exist as a background element of geography. It was a precious commodity gathered through varied infrastructure, seasonal calculation, and physical labor. Across different regions, climates, and social stations, the methods of securing supply varied widely, demanding distinct forms of organization and endurance. In rural farming communities, the proximity of a reliable water source often dictated the very location of a homestead. Families relied upon shallow dug wells, natural springs, or nearby streams. Digging and lining a well required substantial communal or familial labor, often using fieldstone or timber to shore up the earthen walls against collapse. In regions with reliable rainfall and high water tables, drawing water was a matter of dropping a wooden bucket on a hemp rope over a stone-curbed wellhead. Yet, in drier seasons or upland farming settlements, the well might run low, requiring households to haul water in barrels mounted on carts from distant valley springs. This rural labor was woven directly into the agricultural calendar, where the daily task of watering livestock and filling household storage jars took precedence over all else. Urban environments presented an entirely different set of challenges. Packed tightly within defensive walls, growing towns could not rely on individual backyard wells alone, as urban density frequently compromised the purity of shallow groundwater. Instead, medieval and early modern European cities developed sophisticated municipal and corporate networks to bring water into the civic space. In many towns, Public fountains served as the primary nodes of distribution. These fountains were often fed by distant springs via lead, wooden or ceramic conduits, relying on gravity to transport water down hillsides and across valleys. Wealthier towns invested in impressive public works, constructing stone conduits and vaulted subterranean reservoirs that collected and stored spring water before feeding it through a network of lead or hollowed-out log pipes towards central squares and monastic enclosures. Access to these civic water points was rarely uniform. Municipal authorities regulated distribution carefully, granting priority rights to religious houses, royal palaces, and affluent civic institutions, while ordinary townspeople drew from shared public spouts or purchased water from professional carriers. In cities like Paris or London during the early modern period, a distinct class of water carriers emerged to bridge the gap between municipal conduits and private households. These workers used specialized wooden yokes fitted across their shoulders to balance heavy wooden pails, hauling water up winding stairwells into upper-story apartments for inhabitants who lacked the time, servants, or physical strength to make the journey themselves. The cost of this service was modest, yet it represented a constant, recurring household expense that poorer families sought to avoid by sending children or apprentices to the public fountain with smaller jars. Beyond Europe, other regions developed remarkable hydrological traditions tailored to their specific environments. In various Islamicate cities, complex networks of subterranean channels known as qanats or fountains fed by gravity flow aqueducts supplied neighborhoods and courtyard houses with cool, flowing water. Public fountains, often endowed by charitable trusts, were integrated into urban architecture, providing free water to travelers and neighbors alike. Within wealthy urban mansions, courtyard pools and ornate wall basins were fed by these gravity systems, creating a soothing microclimate while ensuring a ready supply for ritual ablutions and domestic use. The maintenance of these conduits required skilled inspectors and laborers who cleared mineral deposits and repaired structural masonry, ensuring that the civic water supply continued to flow through the changing seasons. Seasonality exerted a profound influence on water availability everywhere. During the spring thaw or heavy autumn rains, streams ran high, and cisterns filled quickly with runoff collected from tiled or thatched roofs. In regions dependent on roof collection, such as parts of the Mediterranean or specific island settlements, large underground cisterns were carved into bedrock or lined with waterproof plaster to store precious rainwater for the dry summer months. Households monitored these reserves with great care, knowing that a prolonged drought would shrink the water level in the cistern, forcing a strict rationing of domestic tasks. In winter, freezing temperatures introduced a different hazard. Fountains iced over, pump handles froze solid in their iron brackets, and ice had to be broken or melted indoors over a hearth to secure even the most basic supply for the morning wash. Water quality was another critical factor that communities learned to navigate through observation rather than microscopic analysis. People were acutely aware of the sensory differences between water sources. Hard spring water, rich in dissolved minerals from limestone strata, behaved differently with soap, and tasted distinct from soft rainwater gathered from skies or slow-moving river water laden with silt. While historical populations did not understand bacteria in modern terms, they recognized that water drawn downstream from tanneries or crowded cesspits tasted unpleasant and caused illness, leading municipal laws to prohibit polluting rivers near urban intakes. Consequently, communities prized specific wells or distant springs known for clarity and pleasant taste, sometimes carting drinking water from a favored source, while using closer, lesser-quality river water for washing floors and laundering textiles. Institutional settings, such as monasteries, hospitals, and royal courts, managed water on an industrial scale compared to ordinary cottages. Monastic foundations were frequently cited specifically for their access to running water, engineering elaborate hydraulic systems that diverted streams to flush latrines, feed fish ponds, and supply brewery vats before channeling the outflow through kitchen gardens. These complex networks required constant oversight by designated brothers or hired artisans who maintained sluice gates and cleared sediment from settling basins. In royal palaces, teams of hydraulic engineers and laborers managed water wheels and pumps driven by river currents to force water up into elevated cisterns, creating early examples of pressurized indoor supply for privileged residents. In various maritime or trading port cities, merchants and laborers often relied upon private rainwater barrels placed beneath eaves, as brackish groundwater near the coast was frequently unpalatable. This reliance on collected runoff meant that even in bustling mercantile centers, the morning wash remained tethered to the whims of weather patterns. Throughout these diverse settings, professional water sellers, distinct from individual household carriers, often operated in commercial hubs, using horse-drawn carts to deliver barrels of high-quality spring water to taverns and elite homes, charging by the barrel. This market-based distribution shows that even before the dawn of modern infrastructure, water was a deeply economic good, its movement through a city map reflecting existing social hierarchies and physical geography. For the vast majority of people, however, water storage remained a humble, domestic affair. Inside the home, supplies were transferred from the heavy transport vessels, the wooden bucket, the earthenware amphora, or the metal ewer, into smaller storage jars kept cool in pantries or entryways. These intermediate storage containers served as a buffer between the erratic journey from well or fountain and the quiet, measured demands of the individual washstand. Every drop represented an investment of muscle, time, or coin, establishing an unspoken boundary around how water was used throughout the day. As these smaller household reserves rested in their designated corners, waiting to be drawn upon for the next immediate task, the sheer physical reality of their arrival faded into the background of daily life, leaving only the vessels themselves, ready to portion out the liquid into smaller, refined containers for personal care. Chapter 3: Ewers, Basins, Cloths, and Small Washes. The transition from a stored supply to the intimate act of washing relied upon an array of specialized vessels and textiles that mediated the relationship between body and water. In the quiet transition of a morning, the ewer and basin served as the primary interface for personal maintenance. These tools, varying in material from coarse earthenware and heavy pewter to polished copper or delicate silver, were designed for the measured pour. Because water remained a commodity defined by the labor of transport, the ewer encouraged a precise, controlled delivery, allowing an individual to dispense exactly the amount needed for a morning face or hand wash without waste. This focused approach to cleaning suggests a cultural preference for careful, targeted ablutions over the notion that only total immersion could constitute cleanliness. The basin, a shallow vessel wide enough to accommodate the splashing of hands, was the focal point of this ritual. Placed on a washstand or a sturdy stool, the basin held the water as it was slowly decanted from the ewer, often accompanied by a smaller dish for soap or a designated tray for grooming tools. The basin formed a domestic station. In many households, this arrangement was portable, moved to the room where firelight or morning sun provided the most comfort. For an artisan's family in a crowded urban dwelling, the basin might be a shared family object, set up near the hearth to take advantage of the residual warmth before the day's work began in earnest. In contrast, within elite settings, these vessels were frequently crafted from expensive materials, forming part of a suite of matching furniture that signaled social status and household order. The cloth itself, the linen towel, the woven hemp rag, or the soft cotton square, was an essential partner in this ritual. These textiles were not merely passive tools, but were curated for texture and absorbency. Fine white linen, bleached through sunlight and repeated laundering, was prized for its ability to gentle the skin, while coarser, unbleached fabrics provided the necessary friction to clear away the night's buildup of oil or soot. The management of these cloths was a household skill in its own right. A wet cloth, once finished with, was not left to sour but was carefully wrung out and hung to dry, often near the chimney breast where the warmth helped it dry more quickly and reduced mustiness for the following morning. The rotation of these cloths, ensuring that a clean, dry surface was always available, reflected an unspoken standard of personal care that operated independently of the modern preference for continuous, high-volume water use. Warmth was a significant luxury, dictated by the availability of fuel and the labor involved in heating water. In cold climates or during the long winter months, the effort required to produce hot water was substantial. A metal kettle filled from the household reserve had to be brought to a boil over the hearth, a task that required both space on the fire and the oversight of a family member or servant. Because of this, warm water was typically reserved for the morning wash during the coldest seasons, or for individuals whose health or status demanded it. In many homes, the water used was instead ambient, tempered by the temperature of the room. This cool, bracing water was often believed to be invigorating, a way to sharpen the senses for the work ahead, and it was used routinely by people across various social classes who had adapted to the bracing realities of their climate. The logistics of guest accommodations provided a unique insight into these standards of hospitality. When a household hosted visitors, the provision of a basin, a full ewer of fresh water, and a clean folded towel was a standard duty of the host. This setup was often integrated into the guest room, ensuring that even away from their own familiar hearths, guests could perform their morning and evening ablutions with dignity and independence. This level of service underscored the importance of partial washing as a social necessity. Offering these items was an admission that personal maintenance was a universal requirement, regardless of how far one had traveled or the limited nature of the household's permanent facilities. Partial washing, while focused, was remarkably effective. By targeting areas of high visibility and high sweat, the face, the hands, the neck, and the folds of the skin, people maintained a standard of appearance and comfort that sufficed for the demands of their lives. The back, the legs, and other hidden areas of the body were managed through different, often seasonal routines, reinforcing the idea that cleanliness was not a singular daily event, but a series of distinct, context-specific actions. This approach corrected the historical misunderstanding that, because pre-modern people lacked bathrooms, they were indifferent to their physical state. On the contrary, the precision with which they managed their limited water and their dedicated washing stations suggests a deep, ongoing commitment to being presentable and feeling refreshed. The ritual also extended to those who worked in physically demanding roles. For someone working at a forge, in a tannery, or in a dusty textile mill, the return home at the end of the day prompted a different kind of wash. The focus here shifted from the gentle morning refreshment to the more robust removal of heavy dirt, grease, and industrial residue. A larger basin, or even a shallow wooden tub, might be pulled into use, allowing the individual to scrub their arms and face more vigorously. The cloth used in this process might be sturdier, perhaps made of thick, durable hemp, meant to withstand the repeated scrubbing of rough skin. These evening routines were vital, acting as a boundary between the labor of the outside world and the rest of the private domestic sphere. Gender and age also played roles in how these practices were managed. In many traditional households, the responsibility for maintaining the washstands, cleaning the basins, and ensuring the supply of cloths was delegated to specific household members. These individuals developed an expertise in managing water consumption, knowing exactly how little could be used to achieve a satisfactory result. Children were socialized into these practices early, learning how to handle an ewer without spilling, how to lather soap, and the importance of rinsing the basin afterward so it remained ready for the next person. This shared domestic labor reinforced the household as a coherent unit, where the hygiene of one was inextricably linked to the cooperation of all. Even in environments with limited fuel and hard-to-access water, the presence of these tools, the sturdy basin, and the carefully hung cloth, stood as a testament to the prioritization of personal care. The design of these objects changed little over long stretches of time, proving their functional excellence for the task at hand. They were built for longevity, meant to be used thousands of times, and their surfaces, worn smooth by years of contact with soap and water, held the history of many mornings. The interplay between the hard surface of the bowl and the soft fabric of the cloth was a constant, steadying feature of the early hours. As the morning light grew brighter and the household moved into the rhythm of the day, the leftover water in the basin often contained the faint remnants of the effort, a few bubbles, a streak of oil, or a lingering scent. The removal of this residue, often involving the disposal of soapy, grease-laden liquid, brought to the surface the next practical challenge of the morning routine: what materials were used to actually lift the grime away, and how those cleansers, the fats, the lyes, and the botanical extracts, interacted with the water to create the cleaning effect required for the day ahead. Chapter 4. Soap, ash, oil, and other cleansers. The act of cleansing required more than the mechanical force of water and cloth. It demanded agents that could disrupt the bond between skin and soil. Before the emergence of modern surfactants, the materials used to lift grime were derived from the immediate environment, varying by region and tradition. These substances were not uniform, nor were they always categorized by their intended surface. Rather, they were versatile, often shifting in use from laundry to the kitchen to the basin. Understanding these cleansers requires a cautious approach, focusing on the historical reality of locally sourced ingredients rather than the standardized chemical stability we associate with the present. In many historical settings, the primary agent of cleaning was lye, a caustic solution produced by leaching water through wood ash. The quality of this lye depended heavily on the source of the wood, with ash from hardwoods like oak or beech yielding a more consistent, effective alkali than that of softer conifers. Families in rural regions routinely collected ash from their own hearths, storing it in dry barrels until it was needed for major laundry days or to prepare a concentrated cleaning solution. This lye was powerful, capable of breaking down stubborn grease and animal fats, but it was also harsh to the touch. When used for personal washing, it had to be carefully diluted or blended with other substances to avoid irritation, illustrating the balance between cleaning efficacy and the preservation of the skin's integrity. Soap, while widely available in various forms, was not always the universal default for every task. Hard soaps were made by reacting fats or oils with a sodium-based alkali, while softer soaps commonly used potassium-based alkalis. Their consistency reflected the alkaline method as well as the chosen fat. In Mediterranean regions, the abundance of olive oil led to a robust tradition of soap making, where the residue of olive pressing was transformed into dense, durable bars. These soaps were prized for their mildness, and were used not just for washing hands and faces, but also for bathing and laundry. In northern climates, where olive trees did not thrive, soap was more frequently made from rendered animal tallow. Tallow-based soaps were effective, particularly for scouring heavy textiles, though they possessed a distinct, lingering scent that contrasted with the cleaner, more fragrant profile of the plant-based oils found in the south. For many households, the most common daily cleanser for personal use was not a purchased bar of soap at all, but rather a simple, locally gathered saponaceous substance. Certain clays, known for their ability to absorb oils and suspend dirt in water, were used throughout various cultures. In parts of the Middle East and North Africa, for example, specific mineral-rich earths were harvested, dried, and crushed into fine powders. These powders were mixed with water to create a gentle, mud-like paste that could be massaged into the skin or hair. This method provided a thorough clean without stripping the skin of its natural moisture, a particularly important consideration in arid climates, where water conservation was as critical as the cleaning itself. Vegetable extracts also played a significant role in the historical repertoire of cleansers. The sap, roots, and crushed leaves of various plants, such as soapwort, contained natural compounds that produced a soft cleansing lather when agitated in water. Soapwort, widespread across temperate zones, was often collected from the edges of meadows and woodlands. When boiled, its roots yielded a foam that was remarkably effective for delicate tasks, such as washing fine linens or gently cleansing sensitive skin. Because these botanical cleansers were often seasonal, households learnt to harvest and store the roots during the late summer, ensuring they had enough to last through the winter months. This seasonal dependence reinforced a cycle of cleaning practices that shifted with the natural world, moving from the fresh, plant-based soaps of the spring and summer to the more industrial, hearth-derived lye-based methods of the winter. The distinction between soap intended for the body and soap intended for laundry was often blurred in practice. While wealthy urban centers developed a market for scented, fine-quality soaps destined for the washstand, the average household operated with far less compartmentalization. A single block of tallow soap might be used to scrub floorboards on one day, wash a linen shirt on the next, and serve as the shaving aid for the man of the house on the third. The difference in performance lay not in the product itself, but in the dilution and the intensity of the scrubbing. A small sliver of soap, meticulously managed, was an expensive asset, and every bit was used until it was too small to hold. This economy ensured that nothing was discarded unnecessarily, as the process of acquiring or manufacturing these cleansers required significant labor. Throughout diverse provincial markets, the trade in soap-making ingredients was a specialized branch of commerce. Itinerant merchants often carried bags of potash or concentrated alkaline salts, exchanging them with rural families who had excess wood ash or rendered fat. This reciprocal economy meant that even isolated villages could secure the components necessary to produce their own cleaning agents. Furthermore, the practice of recycling rendered fats from culinary activities into soap was a hallmark of household thrift, linking the preparation of meals directly to the maintenance of the household's cleanliness. In many coastal towns, the use of marine plants and salty ash residues introduced regional variations in the alkalinity and efficacy of the resulting soaps, demonstrating how local ecology dictated the very chemistry of domestic care. Fragrance, when present, served a dual purpose. It masked the natural odor of animal fats or harsh lyes, and provided a sensory marker of freshness. Scented oils, botanical essences, and dried herbs were sometimes added to soap batches, though such additions were typically reserved for the household's finer stocks. Lavender, rosemary, and rose petals were commonly infused into oils or powders, turning the simple act of washing into a momentary luxury. Yet, in the majority of households, the scent of the wash was dominated by the raw materials, the smell of wood smoke from the lye, the faint, salty tang of mineral earths, or the earthy, slightly sweet aroma of tallow. This was the scent of clean as it was known to most, a reminder of the labor and the hearth that powered the process. The application of these cleansers during the morning wash required a practiced hand. A bit of lye or soap might be added directly to the water, or the soap bar might be rubbed onto a dampened cloth to create a lather. This lathering process was crucial, as it allowed the cleanser to penetrate the fibers of the cloth, which in turn carried the soap to the skin. By massaging the skin, The person ensured that the cleanser reached the areas where dirt and sweat collected, from the creases of the palms to the delicate skin behind the ears. Afterward, the rinse was paramount. Removing the soapy residue with a second clean cloth dampened in clear water was the final vital step, ensuring that the cleanser did not remain on the skin to cause discomfort. As the morning routines concluded, the used water, now grey and clouded with the dissolved fats and neutralized alkalis, was cast aside. This water, no longer needed for the basin, carried with it the evidence of the cleanser's work, leaving the face and hands feeling refreshed and ready for the contact of the clothing that would be worn for the remainder of the day. The transition was clear. Once the skin was prepared and the surfaces cleaned, the attention moved outward, toward the layer of fabric that sat closest to the body, a textile shell that served as the final, most constant defense against the world. Chapter 5. Linen next to the skin. The relationship between the body and the fabric that rested closest to it formed a cornerstone of personal hygiene in many historical contexts, particularly across early modern Europe. Linen, derived from the flax plant, was far more than a simple garment choice. It was a fundamental technology of cleanliness. Woven into shifts, shirts, and undergarments, linen was prized not only for its durability, but for its unique capacity to absorb moisture and oil from the skin. Because these garments acted as a porous shield, they were expected to capture the invisible residue of daily life, effectively protecting outer clothing from the body and, in turn, protecting the body from the friction of coarser, less washable outer layers. The ideal of maintaining a clean, white linen layer was deeply embedded in social and cultural expectations. A crisp, white shirt or shift collar peeking out from beneath a woolen doublet or a sturdier bodice signaled a degree of respectability and careful household management. This white linen was a visual shorthand for being clean, regardless of what lay beneath it. Yet, this ideal was deeply tied to the labor required to sustain it. Maintaining a steady rotation of linen, shifting from one set to another, and ensuring that the discarded layers were promptly washed, bleached, and dried, demanded a reliable supply of water, fuel, and the consistent, time-consuming labor of skilled individuals. In affluent households, this system functioned with a rhythm of constant replacement. Servants might change their master's or mistress's linen with frequency, ensuring that clean, sun-bleached garments were always available. These households maintained large inventories of linen, allowing for extended cycles of laundering that ensured clothes could be soaked, boiled, and dried properly. However, for the majority of the population, access to such an inventory was impossible. A small artisan's household might possess only 2 or 3 shifts or shirts per person, meaning that one had to be worn while another was being washed and dried. The reality of hygiene, therefore, was not merely about the existence of the linen itself, but about the household's ability to manage its constant cycle of circulation. Access to linen was also highly dependent on local geography and agricultural practice. In regions where flax cultivation was common, such as parts of the Low Countries, northern France, or the Baltic regions, linen was more accessible. Families in these areas frequently engaged in the home production of their own textiles, moving from the harvesting and retting of flax to the spinning and weaving of the thread. This domestic production meant that linen was an integrated part of household life, with the cleaning of the linen being as much a part of the textile cycle as the weaving itself. In regions where flax could not be easily grown, or where trade was limited, people relied on more varied textiles, such as hempen cloth or coarser wools, which offered different levels of comfort and required their own distinct care regimes. The process of changing linen was rarely a daily occurrence for most people, but it was governed by a set of customary expectations. Regular changes were intended to coincide with the natural cycles of labor and social obligation. A clean shift for a Sunday service or a major market day was a common standard, marking the rhythm of the week with a fresh layer of fabric. In the months of heavy agricultural labor, such as during the summer harvest, changing linen might occur more frequently to manage the increase in sweat and field dust. This adaptability was a key aspect of hygiene. It was a practice that bent to the demands of the environment and the intensity of the work, rather than adhering to a rigid, arbitrary schedule. The physical act of removing a soiled shift or shirt was, in itself, a moment of maintenance. By pulling the garment away from the skin, the wearer shed a layer of accumulated grime and perspiration. This garment, now heavy with the work of the day, was not merely discarded, but often gathered into a laundry basket, or laid aside in a specific corner of the room to await the next washing day. In households where space was at a premium, this management of used linen required constant attention to ensure it did not become damp or mildewed, which would make the subsequent cleaning process significantly more difficult. The care taken in this collection phase was an extension of the morning wash. It was part of a holistic system of managing the interface between the body and its immediate environment. Class and gender also dictated the nuances of this textile hygiene. Women, who frequently managed the domestic textile cycle, were often the gatekeepers of these standards, balancing the needs of the family against the available time and resources. In some settings, the care of men's linen, specifically the stiff, white neckcloths or shirt fronts, was treated with particular urgency, as these were the most visible markers of the household status. For men engaged in manual labor, the linen shirt was often the primary garment of work, and its rapid soiling was an inevitable consequence of trade. Consequently, their linen was often made from sturdier, coarser weaves that could survive the more vigorous cleaning methods required for heavy, oily grime. It is important to avoid the myth that this system was either perfectly hygienic or uniformly neglected. The goal was rarely the eradication of every trace of perspiration or body oil, but rather the maintenance of a manageable state of cleanliness that allowed the garment to perform its duty as a barrier. The reliance on linen as a cleanser of sorts, by trapping the sweat and oil that would otherwise cling to the skin, meant that the fabric became saturated with the very things it was designed to remove. Therefore, the effectiveness of the system depended entirely on the frequency and quality of the laundering process. This system was also highly seasonal. In the depths of winter, when drying clothes outside was nearly impossible due to frost and damp, the entire cycle of linen management slowed down. Families would often accumulate soiled laundry for weeks, waiting for the first mild days of spring to undertake a massive, intensive wash. During these periods, the standard of linen hygiene shifted significantly. People would rely on wearing layers of undergarments for longer durations, using the warmth of the extra fabric to manage the cold, while the process of washing was deferred until the weather allowed for both boiling and thorough drying. This seasonal variation was a normal, expected adaptation to the limitations of the pre-industrial world. The materiality of the linen itself, its crispness when fresh and its softness when worn, provided a sensory experience that anchored the wearer to their social and domestic identity. The weight of a clean, thick linen shift against the skin offered a distinct feeling of readiness for the day. This sensation was a quiet, private indicator of household well-being. Even in modest homes, where resources were tight and labor was intense, the effort to keep at least one set of linen clean for the week was a persistent ambition that defined the boundaries of the household's social life. As these layers were finally removed, the garments carried with them the visible proof of their service. Each piece of discarded linen represented a burden of labor that had now passed from the body to the wash basket, signaling that the time for refreshment was over and the work of the laundry had begun. Chapter 6. Laundry as skilled heavy work. The transition of textiles from the domestic body to the wash place initiated a cycle of intense physical labor that required specialized technical knowledge, endurance, and precise control over natural elements. While the previous phase of wearing and discarding marked a temporary conclusion to personal use, it opened a rigorous industrial and domestic sequence aimed at restoring fibers to usability. This work fell predominantly to women, operating either within individual households or as professional laundresses whose expertise in handling distinct fabrics, temperatures, and cleansing agents defined urban and rural economies alike. The nature of this labor demanded access to reliable water sources, specific architectural spaces, and vast quantities of fuel, making the weekly wash a major logistical undertaking that structured community life. Across different regions and eras, the mechanics of washing varied according to the availability of natural water bodies, purpose-built washhouses, and regional climate conditions. In many European and American settings, natural watercourses such as rivers, streams, and coastal shores served as the primary stations for bulk washing. Temporary or permanent installations along riverbanks, ranging from simple wooden planks extending over the current to communal washhouses equipped with stone troughs, provided the necessary infrastructure. In densely populated urban centers, municipal authorities increasingly regulated these spaces, constructing public washhouses to manage public health and sanitation. These facilities offered partitioned washing stalls, boiling coppers, and drying yards, allowing laundresses to work under standardized conditions. The process began with sorting and soaking, a preparatory stage that loosened surface dirt and body oils without setting stains into the fibers. Laundresses categorized garments by fabric type, color, and degree of soil, recognizing that coarse household linen required a different treatment than fine undergarments. Soaking often took place in wooden tubs or vats overnight, utilizing cold or lukewarm water, sometimes softened with wood ash or lye. This prolonged immersion initiated the breakdown of organic residues through natural chemical reactions, reducing the physical strain required during subsequent mechanical cleaning phases. This step was rarely hurried, as the chemistry of the soak relied on time to soften the stubborn accumulations of the week. Following soaking came the most physically demanding phase of the operation: mechanical agitation and extraction of dirt. Where water access was abundant, washing was frequently conducted directly at the edge of a river or in stone basins where water could be continually flushed through the cloth. Laundresses used a variety of tools to beat, pound, and press the wet textiles. Wooden paddles, known variously as beaters, washing bats, or bitoirs, were employed to force water through the weave of heavy linen shifts and sheets, dislodging particulate matter trapped between the threads. This method required precise timing and force. Excessive striking could rupture delicate seams or tear worn fibers, while insufficient pressure left embedded grime untouched. Alternatively, scrubbing boards ribbed with wood or corrugated metal were used for smaller items, requiring sustained upper body strength and careful manipulation of the fabric against abrasive surfaces. The mastery of these tools was learnt over years, ensuring the washer could identify the exact amount of pressure each weave could withstand without compromise. Boiling represented a critical step for whitening and sanitizing heavy linen and cotton items, particularly in domestic settings where fuel was accessible. Large metal coppers or wash boilers were filled with water, soap, and alkalis such as potash or soda ash, then brought to a rolling boil over open hearths or specialized stoves. The application of sustained heat served a dual purpose. It dissolved remaining grease and fatty acids trapped within the cellulose structure and acted as a thermal disinfectant. Laundresses monitored these boiling vats closely, stirring the dense, steaming mass with long wooden poles to ensure even exposure. The steam and heat released during this process saturated the working environment, creating oppressive atmospheric conditions that characterized the interior labor of washing days. Managing these fires while simultaneously scrubbing at the basin required a high degree of organizational skill, ensuring that nothing burned and that no fuel was wasted. Once boiled and mechanically scoured, the textiles underwent extensive rinsing to remove residual soaps, alkalis, and suspended dirt particles. Rinsing required clear, running water, prompting laundresses to plunge the heavy, hot items back into river currents or clear cisterns, wringing them out repeatedly by hand. This wringing process, twisting the wet fabric in opposing directions using the leverage of arms and torso, demanded significant muscular endurance and frequently led to chronic joint strain among professional washers. The thoroughness of this rinse determined the final quality of the laundry, as any lingering alkaline trace could cause the fabric to yellow over time or feel harsh against the skin. Following rinsing, bleaching on natural meadows, known as bleaching greens or grassing plots, completed the whitening process for unrefined or yellowed linen. Textiles were spread flat across clean turf for extended periods, exposed to direct sunlight, atmospheric moisture, and oxygen. Sunlight, moisture, oxygen, and repeated wetting gradually bleached the fibers through photochemical oxidation, though results depended on weather, water, and handling. In regions lacking sufficient land for bleaching greens, or during adverse weather seasons, chemical alternatives gradually gained acceptance, though they required careful handling to avoid fiber degradation. The rhythm of these greens, with their vast stretches of drying white linen, became a characteristic landscape feature in many textile-producing regions. Professional laundresses operated within a distinct social and economic hierarchy. In many communities, commercial laundering was performed by independent female laborers who managed entire households' linen cycles for fixed wages, while larger institutional establishments employed specialized workforces divided into washers, boilers, starchers, and ironers. The physical toll of this labor was substantial, characterized by constant exposure to dampness, high heat, harsh alkaline solutions, and repetitive physical strain. Despite these hazards, skilled laundresses maintained considerable authority over their working methods, passing down intricate knowledge regarding water hardness, soap formulation, and fabric preservation. Their role was essential to the maintenance of the public image of their clients, often making them privy to the most intimate details of household management. The spatial organization of laundry work also reflected broader socio-economic divisions. Wealthier households maintained dedicated outbuildings, washhouses, or sculleries equipped with fixed plumbing and drainage, isolating the steam, smoke, and moisture of the wash from the main living quarters. In contrast, working-class households often integrated washing into multi-use living spaces, or relied entirely on communal outdoor facilities, coordinating their labor around shared access to water pumps, drying lines, and heating coppers. This communal dimension fostered localized networks of mutual aid and information exchange among women, making the washhouse a central site of community interaction, where news, advice, and the collective burden of labor were regularly shared. As the sequential stages of soaking, beating, boiling, rinsing, and bleaching drew to a close, the massive volume of wet textiles required drying before any finishing could occur. Items were hung upon stretched lines in drying yards, draped over hedges, or laid across clean grass fields, where circulating air completed the evaporation process. The damp, heavy atmosphere of the wash area slowly dissipated as the cleaned garments achieved a stiff, dry state, devoid of the oils and organic residues that had characterized their removal from the body. With the heavy physical labor of cleansing, whitening, and drying successfully concluded, the focus of household maintenance shifted away from the large-scale management of water, heat, and coarse textiles. The crisp, clean fabric surfaces, now neutralized and aired, were gathered from the lines and brought back indoors for folding and storage. This return of textiles to the domestic interior marked a subtle transition in daily routines, redirecting attention toward the finer, more intimate tasks of personal upkeep and the quiet maintenance of the body that preceded the next cycle of social engagement. The focus now turned toward the hair and the grooming tools that occupied the vanity, waiting to serve the refreshed individual. Chapter 7. Combs, hair, shaving, and lice control. The care of the head and the grooming of the face formed a private, consistent ritual that connected the individual to their social environment through the medium of personal presentation. While the laundry cycle addressed the garments worn next to the skin, the daily attention given to hair and facial grooming served as a more direct maintenance of the person. This was not a pursuit of modern vanity, but a practical engagement with hair's natural tendency to collect dust, oil, and unwanted inhabitants. Across historical periods, the tools and traditions of grooming were shaped by cultural expectations, professional requirements, and the necessity of controlling vermin, all while navigating the limitations of a world without modern chemical shampoos or automated grooming devices. Hair management began with the comb, an ancient and fundamental tool found in varied forms across nearly all societies. Crafted from materials as diverse as bone, horn, wood, ivory, and later, vulcanized rubber or metal, the comb was a versatile instrument. Coarser combs were used to detangle and distribute natural scalp oils through the length of the hair, while fine-toothed combs, often known as louse combs, were specialized implements designed for the removal of parasites. These fine combs, with teeth spaced narrowly enough to trap nits and lice, were common household items. Regular use of these tools was an expected component of domestic life, a necessary defense against the infestation that was a frequent challenge in crowded households or among those sharing sleeping quarters. This practice was neither a sign of systemic filth nor an unusual aberration. It was a baseline of hygienic maintenance practiced by rich and poor alike, reflecting a pragmatic awareness of the conditions of the body. The styles of hair were diverse, influenced by regional trends, religious mandates, and the requirements of one's trade. In many early modern societies, hair was kept relatively long and secured with ribbons, pins, or simple caps. For women, the act of brushing and braiding was a time-consuming but necessary morning chore, often performed in the presence of others in the household, reinforcing a communal sense of domestic duty. Men's styles, too, varied. Short hair was common among those whose labor made long hair impractical, while others grew their hair long, relying on regular combing to keep it orderly. The use of oils and pomades, often derived from animal fats or botanical bases, helped to tame the hair and provide a smooth, manageable finish, while also offering a way to add fragrance to the scalp. Shaving was another aspect of facial maintenance that relied on specialized tools and local knowledge. The use of straight razors, honed to a fine edge on leather strops, required a steady hand and a degree of expertise. For those who were not professional barbers, this was a routine often performed at home, with the assistance of a mirror or a bowl of water to prepare the skin. The soap used for shaving was frequently the same hard soap used for washing, lathered into a thick foam that helped to lift the hair and soften the skin, reducing the risk of nicks and irritation. In many urban centers, the local barbershop served as a hub for both facial grooming and social interaction, offering a service that many found more convenient and comfortable than self-shaving, particularly for those who lacked the specialized tools or the time to manage the blade themselves. It is important to navigate away from the common historical simplification that wigs and heavy powders were developed primarily to conceal an unwashed body. While wigs were indeed used, often to protect the head from sun or cold, or to signify status and adherence to fashion. They were rarely the primary method for managing hair hygiene. In fact, wearing a wig necessitated its own maintenance cycle. The wig needed to be cleaned, combed, and sometimes repowdered to stay presentable. The powder itself, usually made from starch or flour and lightly scented, served to absorb excess oil from the wig and provide a crisp, uniform appearance. It was a tool of fashion and presentation, not a blanket solution for a lack of personal cleaning. Most people, throughout most of history, managed their hair directly through regular brushing, combing, and occasional washing with soap or water, maintaining a standard of order that was sufficient for their context. Environmental factors played a significant role in grooming routines. In colder climates, where the frequency of full washing was naturally limited by the need to preserve body heat and manage fuel resources, dry grooming became more pronounced. Brushing helped to lift dirt from the scalp and distribute oils, effectively cleaning the hair without the need for water. In warmer regions, where sweat and dust were more prevalent, hair was more frequently rinsed, sometimes using local infusions or acidic liquids like vinegar to help clear away oil and debris. These methods were not random. They were part of an evolved knowledge base, passed down through generations, that allowed individuals to keep their hair in a manageable state throughout the changing seasons. The domestic nature of these tasks, combing out knots, trimming a beard, or applying a light oil, meant that grooming was often an integrated part of a household's morning rhythm. It happened in the same spaces where breakfast was prepared, where the day's work was planned, and where children were readied for the day. This proximity between grooming and other domestic duties meant that cleanliness was not something relegated to a dedicated room, but something embedded in the flow of the house itself. Every member of the household participated in these routines, creating a shared understanding of what it meant to be groomed and ready for the world outside. Wood tools for these tasks were durable, made to last for decades. A well-made horn comb, kept clean and oiled, could serve a person for a lifetime. These objects were often cherished, passed down as heirlooms, or simply retained as functional staples of the personal kit. The reliance on such durable personal tools speaks to a culture where personal maintenance was a deep-seated, ongoing commitment. It was a practice that respected the body's natural state and focused on the consistent, measured removal of debris and parasites, rather than a single sweeping event of cleaning. As grooming practices evolved over time, the introduction of new materials and the expansion of trade allowed for a greater variety of tools. Yet the fundamental methods remained rooted in the same core requirements: the detangling of fibers, the removal of parasites, and the maintenance of the scalp and face. These rituals were quiet, focused, and profoundly individual, providing a moment of calm reflection before the onset of the day's more strenuous demands. They bridged the gap between the private self and the social persona, ensuring that no matter the station or the location, one could present a face and a head of hair that reflected the care and discipline of the household. As these tools were cleaned, replaced in their pouches, or set back upon the vanity, the process of self-maintenance reached its conclusion. The hair was smoothed, the face shaven or trimmed, and the garments settled into place. The individual was prepared, their personal upkeep complete. While this care was a profoundly domestic act, rooted in the familiar spaces of the home, the very nature of such grooming, of the tools and the substances gathered, also hinted at a different, larger scale of care that could be found elsewhere. While many of these habits remained firmly within the threshold of the home, the search for more specialized facilities, deeper cleaning, and communal social relaxation would eventually lead individuals toward institutional bathing practices that lay beyond the private walls. Chapter 8. Bathing beyond the private house. The transition from individual grooming within the home to the act of bathing in a shared, specialized facility represented a fundamental shift in the landscape of bodily care. Throughout history, various cultures developed distinct institutional approaches to bathing, each deeply embedded in their own unique social, religious, and architectural contexts. It is essential to approach these traditions not as a single, linear evolution of progress, but as independent, parallel responses to the human need for water, warmth, and social engagement. Whether shaped by classical heritage, religious law, or local civic custom, these bathhouse traditions existed as specific, separate institutions, never merging into one universal story. The legacy of Roman bathing, for instance, was deeply tied to the urban infrastructure of the classical world. In cities across the Roman Empire, public baths, or thermae, functioned as elaborate civic centers where engineering met the social life of the citizenry. These structures were monumental, utilizing sophisticated hydraulic systems to feed varying temperatures of pools, frigidarium, tepidarium, and caldarium, while relying on massive hypercost systems to heat both floors and walls. For the Roman population, bathing was a highly structured, communal experience that transcended simple cleansing. It was a daily commitment to a physical ritual that integrated exercise, social negotiation, and maintenance of health. The institutional scale of these baths was tied directly to the availability of water via aqueducts, marking them as products of specific imperial planning that eventually shifted as urban densities and civic budgets fluctuated across centuries. Separately, the development of the Islamicate hammam represented a distinct approach, rooted in both the requirements of ritual purity and the cultural values of comfort and social hospitality. Hammams were designed as sanctuaries of tranquility, often featuring sequences of rooms with varying levels of heat and humidity, which facilitated a gradual relaxation of the body. These facilities were frequently endowed as part of charitable foundations, ensuring that public access was maintained as a core aspect of urban life. Unlike the often monumental Roman bath complexes, the hammam focused on a more intimate, inward-looking design, often centered around a central dome that regulated the internal temperature and light. The hammam was not just a place for washing, it served as a vital community hub where people from varied social backgrounds might gather, though distinctions of status and service often remained visible. In medieval and early modern Europe, the institution of the public bathhouse took a different form, often emerging as a smaller, more localized business within the city's commercial fabric. These European bathhouses, sometimes called stews in certain English contexts, varied widely in their quality and social reputation. Many were modest establishments, offering warm water in private wooden tubs, often situated in city districts where access to fresh water was otherwise limited for the urban working population. These bathhouses were frequently integrated into the economic life of the neighborhood, providing not only water but also services like bloodletting or barbering. While the architectural scale was far removed from the grandeur of imperial Roman sites, these bathhouses played a critical role in the lives of ordinary townspeople who sought warmth during the harsh winters or needed a more thorough cleaning than their limited home supplies allowed. Parallel to these, the Japanese Sento developed as an institution characterized by its specific cultural emphasis on collective purification and relaxation. The Sento was, and remains, an expression of the social value placed on communal harmony and the therapeutic power of water. Unlike the heated dry room approach of the hammam or the cold-to-hot transition of the Roman bath, the Sento centers on the immersion of the body in large, shared tubs of hot water. The architecture of the Sento, typically defined by high ceilings, carefully arranged washing stations, and communal bathing areas, emphasizes a specific etiquette and shared respect. Sento expanded in particular Japanese urban contexts and supported regular communal bathing, while frequency, access, layout, and etiquette varied across periods and communities. The institution followed its own distinct trajectory of development and practice. Each of these bathing traditions occupied its own place in time and geography. To see them as stages in a single, upward climb toward modern hygiene is to misunderstand the rich variety of human experience. The Roman bath was an engine of imperial civic identity. The hammam was a sanctuary defined by religious and social care. The European bathhouse was a pragmatic response to the commercial and environmental pressures of urban living. And the Sento was a manifestation of a deeply rooted cultural appreciation for communal bathing. None of these institutions can be reduced to a precursor of the modern tiled bathroom. They were, instead, robust systems in their own right, operating with their own specific rules, technical requirements, and social expectations. One common thread shared by these diverse institutions was the immense labor required to sustain them. A public bath, whether it was a monumental Roman complex or a modest neighborhood tub house, was fundamentally a heating and water management system. The labor involved was constant, demanding individuals to manage fuel sources, maintain hydraulic pressure, scrub floors, and ensure the quality of the water. Furthermore, these institutions were defined by their own internal etiquette, how one moved through the space, where one left their clothing, how one interacted with other bathers, and the specific rules regarding the separation of genders or classes were all carefully governed by custom. These rules were not static. They changed based on the era, the region, and the specific needs of the institution. Yet they were always present, providing a frame for the bathing experience. The social rules of the bath were perhaps the most telling aspect of these institutions. In the hammam, there were unspoken protocols for how to respect the space of others and how to engage in conversation without disturbing the meditative atmosphere. In the Japanese Sento, the etiquette of washing thoroughly before entering the shared bath remains a cornerstone of the experience. ensuring the cleanliness of the water for all who follow. In the European bathhouse, the social rules were often more transactional, reflecting the commercial reality of the business. Yet even there, the bathhouse was recognized as a place with its own customs and boundaries, distinct from the street outside. These institutions represented a clear choice to move the act of bathing into a larger, more structured environment. This was not a move away from cleanliness, but a move toward a different kind of cleanliness, one that required a higher level of civic or communal participation. By stepping through the doors of a bathhouse, an individual entered into a social contract with the institution and with their fellow bathers. They agreed to abide by the rules of the house, to respect the communal resources, and to participate in a ritual that was fundamentally shared. This institutional approach allowed for a level of bathing that was often impossible to achieve within the confines of the private home, creating a physical and social experience that was, in its own way, complete and satisfying. As one steps further into the internal life of such a public bath, the broader reality of the experience begins to take shape. It is a world governed by the quiet work of those who managed the furnace, the vigilant monitoring of the water, and the subtle, often unwritten codes of behavior that ensured the orderly flow of the bath. The institution itself was defined as much by these invisible rules and the physical toll of its maintenance as it was by the water or the stone walls that contained it. Beyond the entrance of the building lay the heart of the institution, a place where the water was kept at the right temperature, where the attendants worked in the shadows to maintain the flow, and where the daily rhythms of the bath were played out under the watchful eye of custom and rule. Chapter 9. Bathhouse Labor and Etiquette. Behind the quiet routines of the public bath lay a world of constant, demanding labor that remained largely hidden from the casual visitor. To maintain a functional bathhouse was to manage an intricate system of energy and resources, requiring a team of attendants whose work began long before the first guest arrived and continued long after the final person departed. This was not a space of effortless luxury, but one of careful stewardship. From the fueling of furnaces to the scrubbing of tiles, the bathhouse was defined by the physical endurance and organizational skill of the individuals tasked with its daily operation. The core of this work centered on the management of heat and water. In both the Roman-influenced systems and the later, smaller European bathhouses, the furnace was the heart of the institution. Keeping the water at a constant, comfortable temperature necessitated a steady supply of fuel, wood, charcoal, or, in some regions, coal, which had to be hauled, stored, and fed into the fireboxes at precisely timed intervals. Attendants responsible for the furnace lived in a cycle of constant oversight, monitoring the draft, managing the ash, and adjusting the flames to prevent the pools from becoming dangerously hot or uncomfortably cool. This work was hot, soot-stained, and physically exhausting, occurring in the damp, claustrophobic spaces beneath or behind the main bathing chambers. Water management was equally vital. In systems relying on gravity or manually driven pumps, the movement of thousands of gallons of water required a delicate balance. Attendants had to clear debris from conduits, ensure that drainage channels remained free of obstructions, and monitor the water levels in reservoirs and tubs. In facilities where the water was changed manually, the labor was even more intense, draining a large stone pool or a series of wooden tubs, cleaning the interior surfaces to prevent the accumulation of sediment or slime, and then refilling the system required a coordinated effort, often performed during the early morning hours or late at night. The goal was to provide a fresh experience for each wave of visitors, a task that required both diligence and a thorough knowledge of the facility's plumbing, no matter how simple or complex that network might be. Beyond the technical management of the infrastructure, there was the labor of service and maintenance within the bathing rooms themselves. Attendants were responsible for the cleanliness of the tiles, the upkeep of linens, and the management of individual grooming services. In institutions like the hammam, this included the role of the telak, who provided assistance with scrubbing, soaping, and rinsing. This work was highly skilled, involving a deep understanding of the proper pressure to use when scrubbing the skin, the correct temperature for the water, and the specific sequence of treatments preferred by the regular clientele. These attendants were the face of the institution, ensuring that the experience was seamless and that the shared space remained organized. Social rules and etiquette provided the structure for the bathing experience, preventing the confusion that could easily arise in such a high-traffic, semi-public environment. These rules were rarely written down. Instead, they were internalized through observation and repetition. In many societies, the bathhouse operated on a system of segregated hours or days, ensuring that groups with different social or religious status or genders could use the facilities comfortably. This partitioning was not a uniform practice, but it was a common and effective method for managing the complexities of public exposure. Attendants were the enforcers of these schedules, carefully transitioning the facility from one group to the next, a process that required efficiency and clear communication. The behavior within the bathhouse was equally dictated by established norms. There were protocols for how to enter and exit, where to store one's belongings, and how to conduct oneself while in the water or the steam rooms. Behavior depended on the institution. Some bathhouses were lively social spaces rather than quiet retreats, and rules governing speech, belongings, washing, and use of heated rooms differed by place and period. In Japanese communal bathing, washing or rinsing before entering a shared tub became an important expectation, whereas other traditions organized cleansing and soaking differently. Posted rules, attendance, customary turns, and the habits of regular patrons helped keep each facility workable without creating one universal bathhouse etiquette. A visitor therefore learnt the local sequence, where clothing belonged, which rooms were entered first, what services required payment, and how long it was courteous to remain. These practical conventions reduced friction in crowded interiors, while leaving room for conversation, sociability, privacy, or quiet according to the setting. Charges for these services varied according to the nature of the institution. Some baths were supported by civic or religious trusts, making them accessible to the general public at little or no cost. Others functioned as commercial enterprises, with tiered pricing based on the level of service, the quality of the facilities, or the time of day. In these commercial bathhouses, the economic success of the business depended on the ability to attract repeat customers, leading to a focus on consistent quality and the provision of additional amenities such as refreshments, clean towels, or specialized grooming tools. Attendants and owners were thus tasked not only with the mechanics of bathing, but with the business of hospitality, creating an environment that justified the cost to the visitor. The social dynamics of the bath were also influenced by the surrounding community. For a small European town, the local bathhouse was a vital location for information exchange and social networking. For visitors to a city, the hammam provided a necessary service of cleansing and rest, a sanctuary from the bustle of the marketplace or the rigors of the road. In every case, the institution was a reflection of the society that supported it. The way that people interacted in the bathhouse, the level of respect they showed for the staff, and the degree to which they observed the social norms were all indicative of the broader cultural landscape. It is important to remember that these institutions were not designed to be modern private enclaves. They were, by their nature, shared spaces. The labor and the etiquette that governed them were the mechanisms through which that sharing was made possible. The attendants, the furnace workers, and the managers were the invisible hands that made the water flow and the steam rise, while the visitors, through their adherence to the quiet rules of the house, made the space one of communal comfort. This synergy between the providers and the users was what kept the bathhouse functioning, day after day, year after year. As the sun set and the bathhouse moved into its final hours, the tempo of the work slowed. The fires were allowed to die down, the last of the water was drained, and the long, quiet process of cleaning began. The space, once alive with the sound of water and the quiet murmur of visitors, fell into a deep silence. The labor that had started at dawn was finally coming to a rest, leaving the facility clean and prepared for the cycle to begin anew the following morning. Yet, as the visitor left the warmth of the institution and stepped out into the cool night air, the need for care did not end. The focus shifted away from the public ritual of the bathhouse, returning instead to the quiet, domestic necessities that occupied the home, where the fundamental tasks of living and sleeping were balanced with the more private realities of the night. Chapter 10. Chamber pots, privies, and close stools. The rhythms of daily life, both inside and outside the home, necessitated practical systems for the management of bodily waste. These systems were never uniform, but instead were profoundly shaped by the architectural constraints of the building, the economic resources of the household, and the social expectations of the era. Whether in a rural cottage, a bustling urban tenement, or a grand country estate, the management of waste was a fundamental, unavoidable, and highly organized aspect of domestic routine. It required tools and spaces that were carefully integrated into the household's daily flow, handled with a matter-of-fact practicality that respected the need for both utility and privacy. The most universal implement for domestic waste management was the chamber pot. In many homes, these vessels were standard furniture, typically stored beneath the bed or inside a dedicated piece of cabinetry like a nightstand. They were fashioned from a variety of materials depending on a household's wealth, ranging from common, sturdy earthenware and simple tin to fine ceramic or decorated pewter. The chamber pot was a reliable, immediate solution, offering a necessary level of convenience during the night and early morning hours. Its presence was so integrated into the household that its placement and care became routine. It was emptied, cleaned, and replaced with as little disruption as possible. This was not a source of shame, but a basic logistical requirement, handled with an economy of movement that ensured the domestic environment remained comfortable for everyone within it. In households of greater means, or in spaces where more comfort was desired, the close stool provided a more permanent and private option. The close stool was a chair designed with an internal compartment to hold a lidded pot, offering stability and a more deliberate seated posture. These stools were often crafted to blend into the room's decor, sometimes upholstered or finished with fine woodwork, making them unobtrusive additions to a bedchamber. For families who could afford them, the close stool offered a higher degree of comfort and stability, particularly for children, the elderly, or those recovering from illness. It was a piece of specialized furniture that acknowledged the body's needs while maintaining the decorum of the household, demonstrating how domestic design thoughtfully adapted to the requirements of daily life. For households with access to outdoor space, the privy was the primary site for waste disposal. A privy was a small, detached structure built over a deep pit or a stone-lined vault, positioned at a reasonable distance from the house, the kitchen, and the well. The construction of a privy was a significant piece of domestic engineering, requiring the digging and shoring of a pit and the creation of a secure, sheltered seating arrangement. In rural areas, the privy might be a simple wooden shed, while in more substantial homes, it could be a more permanent stone or brick structure. The privy was a place of isolation, a necessity of life that was managed with a steady, pragmatic approach. It was maintained through regular use and, when necessary, the periodic clearing of the pit by professional scavengers or laborers who understood the importance of keeping the soil and the water supply clean. The architectural realities of urban housing created different challenges and solutions. In densely packed cities, where space for a backyard privy was often non-existent, residents relied on shared arrangements. In some apartment buildings or rows of houses, a common privy might be located in a shared courtyard, serving multiple families. Alternatively, multi-story buildings might feature rudimentary waste chutes or internal shafts that dropped refuse into a common cellar or cesspit. These systems demanded a higher degree of collective responsibility and management, as the maintenance of the shared space was essential for the comfort and hygiene of all residents. The shared privy was a site of community organization, where the residents, the landlord, or a contracted laborer had to ensure that the facility remained functional and relatively tidy, reflecting the social interdependence that defined city life. Within large, complex households, the labor of waste management was a specialized task, often delegated to specific servants. The cleaning of chamber pots, the emptying of close stools, and the upkeep of the privies were responsibilities integrated into the daily domestic service. This delegation ensured that the household could function with a level of order that might be difficult to achieve in smaller homes where everyone shared the physical labor. The housemaid, the footman, or the specialized indoor servant carried out these tasks with a professional detachment, handling the vessels and maintaining the facilities as part of the broader work of keeping a home functioning. This system of service allowed the primary inhabitants to move through their day without the constant management of these necessities, yet it also meant that the reality of waste was never truly absent from the household. It was simply handled by those whose work made the comfort of others possible. Privacy, as it was understood in these various settings, was relative and highly contextual. In a small cabin or a single-room apartment, true physical privacy was a luxury of space that few could command. In these environments, the management of the chamber pot was a quiet, shared act, handled with a discretion that acknowledged the shared space while respecting the dignity of every person. In larger homes, privacy was easier to negotiate, with dedicated rooms or hallways providing a buffer between the living quarters and the sites of waste management. Yet, even here, the need for privacy was understood as a social requirement, not just a personal preference. It was a boundary that people negotiated daily, ensuring that the necessary tasks of life were kept distinct from the more public or communal life of the household. The materials used for wiping, such as rags, waste paper, or in some instances, local botanical substitutes, were managed just as carefully as the waste itself. These materials were often collected or prepared as part of the household's routine, ensuring that they were available whenever needed. Because the waste had to be stored, moved, or disposed of, the entire system relied on a consistent, reliable supply of these materials, which were then handled and discarded according to the household's specific arrangements. This, too, was a logistical aspect of the work, an invisible but constant part of the household's domestic economy. The management of these pots, stools, and privies was not a sign of uniform habits, but rather a reflection of the myriad ways people managed the realities of their environment. A family in a region with clay-heavy soil might approach the maintenance of a privy pit very differently than a family in a rocky area with poor drainage. A renter in a city centre had to rely on the building's existing infrastructure, while a landowner had the freedom to site their privy according to their own preference. These differences were not accidental. They were informed by experience, tradition, and the physical possibilities of the land and the building. As the day progressed and the pots were filled or the privies were used, the management of waste became a cumulative concern. It was a task that did not end with the daily cleaning. As the volume of waste continued to grow, and the need for its movement became an ongoing requirement. The domestic systems were efficient, but they were also localized. They collected and held the waste until a larger, more comprehensive process could take over. Each vessel, each stall, and each pit served as a temporary vessel for a substance that simply could not remain within the dwelling, requiring that, at some point, the contents be transported further, toward a destination that lay beyond the walls of the home. Chapter 11. Waste left the house. The transition of waste from the domestic interior to the wider environment was rarely a matter of random disposal. Instead, it was governed by a complex, often localized set of customs, municipal regulations, and economic imperatives. Once the chamber pot or the privy vault reached its limit, the material had to be moved, and this removal process was a pivotal link in the household's connection to the city or countryside. To understand this movement, we must move past the persistent myth that pre-modern streets were universally treated as open sewers. In reality, the management of waste was often highly organized, driven by the practical value of night soil as a fertilizer, and the strict necessity of maintaining communal passages in densely settled areas. In many urban settings, the management of waste relied upon the specialized role of the scavenger or the night soil carrier. These workers were essential figures in the city's infrastructure, tasked with emptying cesspits and transporting the collected material to areas outside the city walls. This work typically took place during the quietest hours of the night to minimize the disturbance to traffic and commerce, a timing that gave rise to the term night soil. The contents of domestic pits were not viewed merely as refuse, but as a resource. In many agricultural regions surrounding large cities, the demand for manure was constant, and the waste collected from urban households became a valuable commodity, sold by scavengers to farmers who transported it to the countryside to enrich their fields. This circular economy, linking the daily necessities of the urban household to the seasonal requirements of rural agriculture, ensured that waste was frequently treated with a degree of economic foresight rather than simple negligence. The infrastructure facilitating this removal varied significantly. In cities fortunate enough to possess functioning drainage systems, waste from privies might flow into stone-lined cesspits located deep beneath the cellar or courtyard. These pits were designed to be periodically accessed by professional laborers who would excavate the contents using long-handled buckets and specialized carts. Some cities, particularly those with access to rivers, experimented with municipal drains that carried waste away from the core of the city, though these systems were often unevenly distributed and prone to clogging. The design of a cesspit often reflected the geology of the area. In permeable soils, some liquids leached into the ground, a process that required careful placement of the pit far from the local well to prevent contamination. The awareness of this danger, the link between waste and water, was a common, if not always perfectly executed, element of municipal and domestic planning. Municipal regulations played a significant role in defining how waste left the house. Many towns and cities instituted strict rules regarding when and how material could be transported, as well as where it could be deposited. Residents in many medieval and early modern jurisdictions were legally required to keep the frontage of their homes clean, and local ordinances often forbade the dumping of refuse into public streets or waterways, imposing fines on those who violated these norms. While enforcement was never uniform, the existence of these rules demonstrates a clear awareness of the need for public order and sanitation. The responsibility was often shared. The landlord might be held accountable for the maintenance of a building's shared cesspit, while the individual tenant was tasked with the daily management of their own indoor vessels. This layering of responsibility reflected a broader social contract, where cleanliness was considered a collective effort. In rural communities, the process of waste removal was less a matter of municipal regulation and more a matter of immediate land management. Privies were moved when pits became full, and the old sites were often filled with soil and left to decompose, eventually becoming fertile ground for gardens or orchards. This integration of human waste into the local landscape was a practiced cyclical method that respected the limits of the land. Lower density could reduce pressure, though poorly placed pits still contaminated wells, soil, or nearby water. Waste remained local, handled by people who used it on their plots. The distinction here was stark. While the urban dweller relied on the specialized labor of the scavenger and the infrastructure of the municipal system, the rural resident relied on their own labor and their understanding of the local soil and seasonal requirements. The value of the waste itself, the night soil, varied based on the diet of the population and the specific needs of the farmers who bought it. In regions with dense farming populations, waste was a form of capital, carefully tracked and accounted for. This economic incentive meant that waste was rarely left in the sense of being abandoned. It was collected, stored, and sold as part of a structured trade. Even in households that did not sell their refuse directly, the practice of composting human and animal waste together was a standard feature of many homesteads. Such storage or composting could make material more stable or usable, without guaranteeing that it was free of hazards, demonstrating that the understanding of waste as a resource was widespread, even if the methods of processing it were humble. Architecture, too, played a role in these systems. In some cities experiencing rapid growth, the sheer volume of waste outpaced the capacity of the scavengers to remove it, leading to the creation of massive, overflowing pits that became a recurring source of concern for city councils. In these instances, the problem was not a lack of interest in cleanliness, but a failure of the municipal infrastructure to keep up with the density of the inhabitants. As buildings were renovated or expanded, old cesspits were sometimes built over, creating structural challenges that only came to light decades later. The history of urban waste is in many ways the history of cities struggling to match their growing population with a system of removal that was both timely and physically sustainable. One of the most persistent aspects of this system was its invisibility. For the average resident, the removal of waste was a quiet, routine event. They might hear the low rumble of the night soil cart on the cobblestones, or see the scavenger's tools stored in a corner of the courtyard. But the actual process of removal remained largely shielded from their daily view. This discretion was intentional. It was part of the broader effort to keep the household and the street a place of social order. By relegating the removal of waste to the night, and relying on the labor of the professional scavenger, the city maintained an appearance of calm, ensuring that the messy reality of living remained separate from the public and private life of the inhabitants. As the years passed, the methods used to move waste out of the dwelling evolved in response to changing technology and increasing urban density, yet the core principles remained constant. Whether through the systematic clearing of a cesspit by a municipal laborer or the gradual movement of a homestead privy by a farming family, the goal was always the same: to keep the immediate environment of the home within the bounds of safety and usability. This required a constant, watchful eye, not just on the pots and the privies themselves, but on the accumulated traces of living that had to be handled, removed, and integrated back into the cycle of the land. With the waste safely removed from the vicinity of the home, the focus shifted from the external management of refuse to the internal, more intimate requirements of the dwelling. Once the air was cleared and the major disposal tasks were complete, the attention moved toward the delicate work of maintaining the living spaces themselves, the quiet, careful labor of washing the rooms where people ate, slept, and in times of illness, sought recovery. This transition brought to the fore the necessity of keeping the domestic environment not just clear of waste, but thoroughly, gently cleaned. Chapter 12. Bedrooms, sick rooms, and careful cleaning. The interior landscape of the pre-modern home demanded a constant, measured defense against the quiet accumulation of dust, damp, and the physical traces of human illness or fatigue. While the larger operations of water hauling, laundry, and waste removal handled the heavy logistics of cleanliness, the maintenance of private rooms, particularly bedrooms and sick rooms, required a different kind of vigilance. This was an intimate domestic labor focused on surfaces, air quality, and the careful management of textiles that could not be washed every day. In spaces where people slept, recovered from sickness, or experienced the major physical transitions of life, cleanliness was maintained through a routine of airing, sweeping, and careful tending. The bedroom, centered around the bed itself, was the primary site of this localized care. Beds in historical households were substantial investments, constructed with heavy wooden frames, corded or slatted bases, and thick mattresses stuffed with straw, feathers, or wool, topped with layers of quilts, blankets, and linen sheets. Because these bulky sleeping systems could not be easily laundered in their entirety, a daily ritual of aeration and realignment was essential. Upon rising, blankets and sheets were folded back or stripped entirely, allowing the mattress and bedding to breathe and release the moisture accumulated from the sleeping body throughout the night. In many households, pillows and lightweight covers were carried out to a courtyard, balcony, or window ledge to be exposed to fresh air and sunlight, which were understood through practical observation to help freshen fabrics and reduce dampness. This daily airing of the bed was complemented by the sweeping and dusting of the bedchamber floor. Whether the floor was made of packed earth, bare timber planks, or covered with woven rushes and carpets, it collected the particulate matter of daily life, hearth ash, tracked in soil, and shed fibers. Sweeping was performed with simple twig or straw brooms, an action that required a gentle hand to prevent dust from billowing back up to settle on the freshly aired bed linens. In some traditions, herbs, dried lavender, or scented rushes were scattered across the floor before sweeping, releasing a pleasant fragrance as they were gathered up, and helping to mask the stale odors of an enclosed room. This careful management of the floor and the air ensured that the bedchamber remained a restorative environment rather than a stagnant one. When illness entered the household, the demands on these interior spaces intensified significantly. The sick room became a focal point of intense domestic labor, requiring specialized care to manage the environment of a person confined to bed for days or weeks. Maintaining air quality in the sick room was a primary concern. Despite the common fear of night air in various historical periods, caregivers frequently opened windows during safe daytime hours to clear the room of lingering vapors and refresh the atmosphere. Bed linens, shift changes, and cloths used to wipe fevered brows had to be managed with heightened frequency, often kept separate from the general household laundry and handled with extra care to prevent the spread of contagion or discomfort. The cleaning of surfaces, the emptying of vessels, and the constant adjustment of pillows required an attentive, unbroken dedication from family members or designated attendants. The management of other significant bodily transitions, such as childbirth and the regular rhythm of menstruation, similarly required specialized domestic adjustments within these private spaces. During childbirth, which took place almost exclusively at home across most historical eras, the bedchamber was temporarily transformed into a restricted zone managed by female relatives, experienced neighbors, or professional birth attendants. Layers of protective cloths, often referred to as drawer sheets or cradle sheets made from older, softer linen, were laid down to absorb fluids and protect the primary mattress. These textiles were systematically gathered and washed after the event, forming a distinct category of intensive laundry labor. Similarly, the management of menstruation involved the use of designated absorbent cloths, carefully washed, dried, and stored away from general view, representing a private, continuous aspect of personal care that relied on the household's overarching textile management systems. These practices varied considerably according to social station and available resources. In affluent homes, dedicated domestic servants managed the daily airing of multiple bedchambers, replaced linens with frequency, and used specialized warming pans and scented waters to ensure the sleeping quarters met elite standards of comfort and refinement. In contrast, working-class families in urban tenements or modest rural cottages often slept in shared spaces where multiple individuals occupied the same bed or room, making the daily airing of bedding a coordinated communal effort constrained by limited space and a shortage of spare linens. Yet, regardless of class, the core principle remained the same. The bed and the immediate sleeping environment had to be actively maintained to prevent them from becoming foul or uncomfortable. The sensory atmosphere of the bedroom and sick room was an important indicator of proper maintenance. A well-kept room was expected to smell of fresh air, clean linen, and perhaps the faint, calming aroma of dried herbs or burning resin used to purify the space during illness. Conversely, a room that lacked these attentions quickly developed a heavy, stagnant odor that signaled neglect. Caregivers and household managers were acutely sensitive to these shifts in atmosphere, treating scent not merely as a pleasant luxury, but as a diagnostic tool that indicated whether the room was sufficiently aired and cleaned. Furthermore, throughout many early modern towns and provincial communities, local domestic customs dictated specific seasonal deep cleanings of bedchambers, where mattresses were completely emptied and their natural stuffings, such as dried straw or chaff, were entirely replaced following the autumn harvest. This annual or semi-annual renewal prevented the accumulation of pests and moisture deep within the bedding layers, serving as a vital complement to the daily airing routines. In grand estates, housekeepers meticulously inspected these frames and hangings, ensuring that heavy woolen draperies surrounding four-poster beds were brushed and beaten to remove dust mites and soot from indoor hearths. In addition to seasonal replacements, historic inventory records indicate that bedchambers frequently housed washing basins and small tables specifically designated for morning and evening pharmaceutical applications, keeping medical powders, herbal infusions and clean bandages within immediate reach of the bedside. This spatial organization ensured that remedies and hygiene supplies were integrated directly into the zone of rest. This quiet, continuous labor of room maintenance reinforced the boundaries between the chaotic outside world and the private interior of the home. By smoothing blankets, sweeping floors, airing mattresses, and tending to the needs of the sick, individuals created a controlled, restorative space. These tasks were woven into the very fabric of daily existence, demanding neither the heavy machinery of the public bathhouse nor the industrial scale of the riverside laundry, but rather a quiet, persistent attention to detail. It was work that repeated every single morning, an endless cycle of renewal that kept the dwelling habitable and secure. As the bedding was rearranged, the sick room tended, and the private quarters brought into order, the physical labor of the morning reached its final interior phase. The rooms where life was sustained, rested, and occasionally healed were settled and calm, cleared of the night's residues and prepared for whatever the day might bring. Yet, looking back across the entire sequence of these domestic acts, from the carried water at dawn to the carefully managed linens and the quiet maintenance of the bed, we might begin to wonder how these distinct practical habits gradually transformed into broader cultural standards of personal respectability, health, and moral order. Chapter 13. Cleanliness, Respectability, and Changing Standards. As we trace the daily cycle from the first morning basin to the carefully aired bedchambers, it becomes clear that the physical acts of maintenance were never merely mechanical routines. Across different eras, regions, and social strata, these practices were deeply intertwined with evolving ideals of respectability, social order, and moral value. To view this history as a simple, uninterrupted march from medieval neglect to modern enlightenment is to misunderstand the rich complexity of how past societies defined purity and care. Cleanliness was not an absolute standard that remained constant over centuries. Rather, it was a shifting set of expectations informed by religious traditions, social hierarchies, changing medical understandings, and the practical possibilities of daily life. In many historical settings, the visible markers of cleanliness served as a direct reflection of an individual's social standing and moral discipline. A pristine white linen collar, a well-groomed appearance, and an orderly household communicated respectability long before the arrival of modern germ theory. These visual and sensory cues established boundaries within communities, signaling who belonged to polite society and who fell outside its margins. Yet, these standards of respectability were rarely accessible to everyone in equal measure. The labor and resources required to maintain a visibly clean exterior, abundant water, costly soap, fuel for boiling, and the time-intensive work of laundering meant that elite expectations of purity were often beyond the reach of the laboring poor. Consequently, definitions of cleanliness were frequently tied to class distinctions, where the ability to delegate dirty work to others became a key marker of social elevation. Religious and spiritual traditions also played a powerful role in shaping how cleanliness was perceived and practiced. Across various cultures and faiths, physical washing was frequently linked to ritual purity, moral cleansing, and spiritual preparation. Ablutions before prayer or sacred rites bridged the gap between the physical body and the divine, embedding hygiene into the sacred rhythm of the calendar. Even in secular or domestic contexts, moral treatises and conduct books often framed personal care as a reflection of inner virtue. A disordered, unclean home was sometimes interpreted as a sign of spiritual or moral laxity, while a well-kept dwelling suggested diligence, piety, and self-control. These cultural associations ensured that the management of the body in the home carried profound symbolic weight, far exceeding basic physical utility. As societies moved into the 19th century, these traditional frameworks of respectability and moral order began to intersect with new scientific and public health movements. Early and mid-19th century sanitary reform was driven largely by miasma ideas, practical observation, and concern about foul air, crowding, drainage, and contaminated surroundings. Germ theory gained broader influence later in the century, gradually adding microorganisms to the vocabulary of cleanliness and disease prevention. This scientific shift did not instantly erase older habits, but it slowly transformed the cultural meaning of the wash basin, the laundry tub, and the public bath. Cleanliness increasingly acquired a scientific public health meaning, alongside older ideas of decorum, morality, comfort, and spiritual readiness. This 19th century transformation also altered the physical infrastructure of daily life. Public health advocates and municipal governments began to view the management of water supply, street cleaning, and waste removal as vital responsibilities of the state, rather than matters left entirely to individual households or private trade. The expansion of piped water networks into urban neighborhoods, the construction of centralized sewage systems, and the establishment of municipal washhouses and public baths redefined the relationship between the citizen and the state. Cleanliness became institutionalized, supported by civic legislation and engineering projects that aimed to lower disease rates among rapidly growing urban populations. Yet, this process was uneven. Working-class tenements and rural districts often lagged far behind affluent suburbs in receiving these new infrastructural benefits, ensuring that class disparities in hygiene persisted well into the industrial age. Despite these sweeping institutional changes, the transition toward modern sanitation was not a sudden rupture with the past. Many traditional practices, such as the reliance on family-managed laundering, the careful airing of heavy bedding, and the targeted morning wash at the basin, persisted within domestic spaces alongside the new technologies of indoor plumbing and running tap water. People adapted their inherited knowledge to fit the new fixtures, blending old habits of economy and care with the conveniences of modern engineering. The private home remained a primary site where these standards were negotiated, taught, and maintained on a daily basis, demonstrating that domestic culture evolved through a gradual layering of new ideas over enduring practices. Furthermore, the expanding emphasis on cleanliness created new social pressures, particularly for women, who continued to bear the primary responsibility for domestic maintenance. As cultural expectations of household hygiene rose during the 19th and 20th centuries, the standard of what constituted a clean home became increasingly demanding. The introduction of new cleaning technologies did not necessarily reduce the total labor of housekeeping. Instead, it often raised the baseline of cleanliness, requiring more frequent washing, ironing, and scrubbing to meet the new cultural ideals of domestic perfection. This dynamic highlighted a persistent tension between the desire for a pristine environment and the heavy physical toll required to achieve it. Throughout earlier pre-industrial centuries, civic authorities had already enacted various municipal ordinances concerning waste disposal and water protection, proving that the regulation of urban hygiene was never solely a modern invention. Guild regulations in medieval manufacturing towns often penalized members whose trades fouled shared water sources, demonstrating an early practical understanding of ecological limits within urban confines. However, these pre-modern interventions lacked the systematic bacteriological rationale that characterized later 19th century sanitary legislation, relying instead on empirical observations of nuisance, odor, and civic harmony. Similarly, early modern medical treatises frequently debated the merits of water contact, with various physicians cautioning against full-body immersion, while simultaneously championing the regular cleansing of the hands, face, and teeth as vital safeguards against humoral imbalance. These evolving medical discourses reinforced the idea that cleanliness was a dynamic concept, continuously reinterpreted by scientific and cultural authorities to match the changing anxieties of each generation. In tandem with these medical shifts, institutional philanthropy during the early industrial era established model lodging houses and public washhouses explicitly designed to instill moral discipline through regulated cleanliness among the urban working classes. As philanthropic societies and municipal planners surveyed the crowded alleys of growing factory cities, they increasingly linked domestic tidiness with civic order, creating a complex web of moral and sanitary expectations that dictated working-class life. Looking back across the entire spectrum of these historical developments, we see a continuous dialogue between human aspiration and environmental limits. Whether through the heavy labor of hauling water from a communal fountain, the rhythmic beating of linen on a riverbank, the careful tending of a bedside sickroom, or the later implementation of municipal water grids, humanity has consistently sought to manage the body's relationship with its surroundings. Each era constructed its own solutions, balancing the need for physical comfort and social respectability against the material constraints of its time, leaving behind a rich legacy of domestic endurance. This long history reveals that our modern concepts of hygiene are built upon centuries of accumulated practice, adaptation, and social negotiation. The quiet morning ritual at the washstand was never an isolated event. It was linked to the wider world of water conduits, public bathhouses, night soil removal, and changing scientific paradigms. As these evolving standards of health and respectability took hold, they exerted an ever-increasing pressure on the existing infrastructure of towns and cities, demanding new solutions for the delivery of clean water and the removal of waste that would reshape the modern landscape forever. Chapter 14. Pipes enter the home. The shifting standards of health and respectability that took hold across industrializing societies placed an unprecedented demand on the physical infrastructure of towns and cities. For centuries, the domestic routine of cleaning had depended on manual labor, carried water, and fragmented methods of waste disposal. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, however, municipal authorities, civil engineers, and urban planners sought to transform this relationship through large-scale public works. The result was the gradual introduction of pressurized water grids and subterranean sewer networks, an ambitious transformation that brought pipes directly into the private dwelling and forever altered the domestic landscape. Yet, it is crucial to distinguish between the abstract invention of a technology, its initial municipal installation beneath main thoroughfares, and its actual mass access for ordinary households. The existence of cast-iron water mains beneath a city street, or the formulation of modern plumbing patents, did not mean that every home immediately enjoyed running water and flush toilets. The spread of indoor plumbing was remarkably uneven, dictated by economic class, housing tenure, regional geography, and the slow pace of real estate development. While affluent suburban villas and newly constructed urban apartment blocks for the middle classes were rapidly equipped with bathrooms and internal drainage, working-class tenements, rural farmsteads, and colonial outposts often experienced a very different timeline of modernization. In many rapidly expanding industrial cities, the initial phase of piped water infrastructure focused primarily on public standpipes and main thoroughfares rather than individual room connections. Landlords of older urban tenements frequently delayed installing internal plumbing due to the high capital costs, preferring to maintain shared courtyard pumps or outdoor water taps to service multiple tenant families. Tenants in rented urban housing had little control over these infrastructural decisions, often relying on municipal pressure or changing housing laws to compel property owners to upgrade substandard facilities. Consequently, working-class families continued to haul water up narrow stairwells and utilize shared courtyard privies long after engineering manuals declared the era of modern indoor plumbing to have arrived. In rural regions, the transition was slower still, bound to the physical isolation of the countryside and the absence of municipal utility grids. Farmhouses and isolated cottages relied on independent solutions, such as wind-driven pumps, improved well systems, or gravity-fed cisterns, long before central authorities extended electrical lines or water pipes outward from town centers. For these rural populations, the arrival of internal plumbing was often an individual, domestic project undertaken over decades, rather than a sudden municipal rollout. Similarly, in various colonial contexts, infrastructural development was sharply bifurcated. Piped water and modern sanitation facilities were frequently concentrated in administrative enclaves and elite neighborhoods occupied by colonial officials, while indigenous neighborhoods and rural settlements were left dependent on traditional water sources and rudimentary drainage systems. When indoor plumbing did finally penetrate the domestic sphere, it acted as a unifying force for systems that had previously been scattered across the courtyard, the hearth, and the washstand. The most visible manifestation of this change was the creation of the dedicated bathroom, a room that consolidated multiple domestic functions under a single roof. Where earlier generations had relied on portable basins, ewers, and chamber pots, the new fixtures offered a permanent connection to municipal supply and drainage. The washstand gave way to the porcelain basin with fixed hot and cold taps. The close stool and chamber pot were replaced by the water closet, and the portable tub was superseded by the stationary bathtub, supplied by pressurized water heated centrally by the home's boiler. This consolidation of fixtures transformed the daily morning routine. The physical labor of hauling water from a courtyard well or street conduit was replaced by the simple turn of a chromium or brass handle. The water arrived instantly, clear and pressurized, and disappeared just as quickly down the drain, removing the need for the grey water bucket or the midnight trip to the privy. Yet, this convenience also brought new forms of labor and maintenance. The complex network of lead, iron, and later copper pipes, valves, and traps required regular attention to prevent leaks, freezing, and blockages. The homeowner or tenant inherited the responsibility of maintaining a delicate domestic machine, where a single broken pipe could disrupt the entire household. Moreover, the introduction of the indoor bathroom redefined the architectural layout of the home. In new residential designs, the bathroom became a standard, often interior room requiring mechanical ventilation or careful placement against exterior walls. In older homes undergoing retrofitting, small closets, pantries, or even portions of bedrooms were awkwardly partitioned to accommodate the new porcelain fixtures, demonstrating the structural friction of adapting historical architecture to modern expectations. This spatial reorganization also carried cultural implications, reinforcing the modern boundary between private bodily care and the public spaces of the home, further segregating the messy realities of hygiene behind a locked door. Despite these dramatic changes, the older traditions did not vanish overnight. Even in homes with modern plumbing, habits persisted. People retained the familiarity of smaller basins for quick morning washes, or continued to use traditional methods of airing bedding and cleaning surfaces that machines could not reach. The new infrastructure provided a foundation of convenience, but it operated alongside the enduring rhythms of domestic care. The transition was one of layering, new pipes running through old walls, modern taps filling traditional vessels, and the demands of sanitation meeting the realities of daily life. Furthermore, early municipal water initiatives frequently encountered public resistance regarding water meters and usage fees, as working-class communities accustomed to open access points viewed metered domestic taps as an intrusion into household economy. Plumbers and sanitary inspectors also had to navigate diverse regional building codes, which varied widely between municipalities regarding pipe diameters, trap requirements, and the mandatory separation of greywater drainage from human waste lines. These administrative and financial hurdles meant that the physical realization of modern plumbing networks was a contested, gradual process, rather than an instantaneous technological leap. In addition to regulatory and financial debates, early plumbing designs introduced unique material challenges that required specialized maintenance. Early water closets often featured complex mechanical valves, wooden seats lined with metal, and high-tank gravity flushes that produced distinct echoing sounds throughout the house. Plumbers frequently experimented with different sealing compounds and venting configurations to prevent sewer gases from breaching the domestic interior through dry drain traps. These evolving technical adjustments underscored that the indoor bathroom was not a static invention, but an ongoing mechanical evolution, requiring continuous human oversight. Concurrently, the manufacturing revolution in sanitary ceramics shifted production from localized artisanal pottery shops to large industrial foundries, standardizing the shape, glaze, and durability of basins and tubs. This mass production lowered costs over time, allowing middle-class households to adopt matching bathroom suites that emphasized clinical whiteness as a visual standard of purity. Catalogs from major manufacturers advertised these fixtures not merely as functional utilities, but as essential guarantees of domestic health and modern refinement. As these interconnected systems of supply and drainage consolidated within the walls of the dwelling, the scattered elements of the morning routine found their permanent home. The water that once had to arrive from a distant spring, the soap that was managed in small slivers, the waste that required nocturnal removal, and the linen that demanded heavy labor were all brought into a new, streamlined relationship, defined by the flow of the pipe. The bathroom stood as the physical culmination of this long historical journey, gathering formerly separate systems into a single, enclosed space that would continue to shape the modern experience of home, health, and daily life. Chapter 15. What the modern bathroom gathered together. The enclosed room that finally claimed a corner of the dwelling did not invent the desire for cleanliness. Rather, it drew together the disparate fragments that had long been scattered across yards, stairwells, and hearths. For generations, the management of the body had required a nomadic sort of labor, demanding that water be carried from distant wells, waste be hauled away under the cover of darkness, and heavy linens be transported to rivers or courtyards for scouring. By enclosing these various needs behind a latched door, the modern bathroom created an illusion of absolute self-containment. Yet, beneath the gleaming porcelain and polished chrome, this new space remained tethered to vast, unseen networks of extraction, filtration, and disposal that stretched far beyond the foundation walls of the house. And consider the single act of turning a tap. In that brief movement of metal, the room absorbed what once took hours of physical exertion at a communal pump or stream. The weight of the wooden yoke, the slop of the leather bucket, and the chill of the morning frost along the path were replaced by the steady, invisible pulse of municipal pressure. Yet, the water did not simply appear. It was drawn from distant reservoirs, pumped through miles of subterranean iron mains, and treated with chemicals to ensure its clarity. The modern basin stood as the visible termination of an industrial river, delivering a torrent of potable liquid with a flick of the wrist while concealing the massive engineering works required to keep the current flowing. Beside the basin, the porcelain water closet absorbed the ancient burdens of the chamber pot and the distant privy. No longer did anyone need to navigate a dark garden path in the winter cold, or coordinate the quiet removal of nocturnal vessels before dawn. The waste vanished downward into a sealed labyrinth of lead and cast iron pipes, swallowed by a sudden rush of water that whisked it away into the municipal sewer. This instantaneous disappearance fundamentally altered the sensory texture of daily life, banishing the persistent odors and visible reminders of refuse that had once shaped the architecture of every courtyard and back alley. Yet, the out-of-sight reality of the sewer did not erase the labor of waste management. It merely relocated it underground, where municipal workers and maintenance crews labored in damp tunnels to keep the subterranean city clear of blockages. The bathtub, too, gathered into its smooth enamel embrace a lineage of bathing practices that had previously required copper coppers, timber washtubs, and countless trips with boiling kettles. For households with reliable piped hot water, a stationary tub could invite fuller immersion without repeated trips from kettle to vessel. In those particular homes, bathing became easier and more private, while tenants, rural families, and many poorer households continued to rely on older arrangements or shared facilities. Yet, this luxury depended entirely on a continuous consumption of fuel, coal, gas, or oil, burned in a basement furnace or utility room to heat the water before it reached the porcelain shell. The warmth of the bath was thus an imported comfort, reliant on the constant tending of flames elsewhere in the building. Even the humble elements of personal grooming found their permanent stations within this tiled enclosure. The razor, the comb, the soap dish, and the clean linen towel, once carried from room to room in baskets or kept on portable washstands, now rested on glass shelves and chrome racks designed specifically for them. The bathroom walls, lined with smooth tile or moisture-resistant paint, replaced the soot-stained timber and lime-washed plaster of older domestic spaces, offering a surface that could be wiped clean with a damp cloth rather than laboriously scrubbed with sand and lye. This architectural shift made maintenance easier, yet it also created a new standard of pristine visibility, where any stray hair or water spot stood out in sharp relief. The labor required to maintain this centralized room, however, did not vanish. It merely changed its form. The heavy outdoor work of hauling water and emptying night soil was replaced by the constant, meticulous care of surfaces and mechanics. Limescale had to be scraped from chrome fixtures, porcelain bowls scrubbed to prevent staining, and drain traps cleared of hair and soap scum. In homes with domestic staff, these duties fell to indoor servants, whose daily routines were structured around the upkeep of the private bathrooms of the household. In homes without servants, the burden was absorbed by the residents themselves, turning every tenant or homeowner into an intermittent mechanic and caretaker of the domestic waterworks. Furthermore, this concentration of plumbing within the private home was never a universal reality. While middle-class suburbs and modern urban apartment blocks rapidly adopted the full suite of fixtures, millions of people continued to live in spaces where indoor plumbing was an unattainable luxury. In crowded tenements, rural farmstead cottages, and rapidly growing industrial outskirts, families still relied on shared yard taps, outdoor privies, and portable wash basins. The modern bathroom was thus a potent symbol of social division, marking the boundary between those who enjoyed the invisible conveniences of municipal infrastructure and those who remained bound to the older, manual rhythms of water and waste. A spatial consolidation within the bathroom also reinforced a new cultural understanding of privacy and the body. By gathering the wash basin, the tub, and the toilet into a single, lockable room, society drew a sharp line between the public spaces of social interaction and the intensely private spaces of bodily maintenance. The body's natural functions and the processes of cleansing were rendered invisible, tucked away behind a solid door, rather than accommodated through movable screens or shared domestic areas. This architectural enclosure fostered an emerging ideology of bodily squeamishness, where the physical realities of sweat, waste, and decay were expected to be completely erased from polite conversation and daily consciousness. In tandem with these architectural adjustments, early 20th century domestic science manuals and public health exhibitions increasingly promoted the bathroom as a moral sanctuary, instructing homemakers on the scientific management of household sanitation. These instructional texts categorized every surface and fixture according to germicidal efficiency, turning the daily cleaning of the bathroom into a rigorous exercise in disease prevention. that mirrored clinical environments. The aesthetic of the space shifted toward clinical whiteness, white tile, white porcelain, and white enamel, deliberately signaling a clean, antiseptic boundary that separated the ordered interior of the modern home from the perceived disorder of the outside world. Beyond standard municipal architecture, early 20th century housing acts in various European and American cities occasionally mandated minimum sanitary facilities for newly built tenement blocks, attempting to bridge the gap between working-class housing and middle-class standards. Yet, the installation of these shared or individual water closets frequently created new administrative disputes regarding who bore the financial responsibility for repairing broken valves and clogged soil pipes. Landlords and municipal sanitary inspectors constantly negotiated the limits of tenant accountability, ensuring that the physical infrastructure of the bathroom remained a site of ongoing social tension even as it promised domestic harmony. Yet, despite all the machinery, the engineering, and the cultural shifts, the bathroom remained a quiet place at certain hours of the day. When the morning rush subsided and the household settled into its routine, the room regained a stillness that echoed its long history. The water in the pipes grew cold and motionless. The porcelain surfaces dried under the steady draft of the ventilation, and the lingering scent of soap and damp air settled into the corners of the tiles. Near the window, a single white basin caught the faint morning light. Across its porcelain rim lay a freshly folded linen cloth, untouched and crisp. Beneath the floorboards, the resting pipes waited in silence, their metal veins carrying no sound of rushing current. The heavy labor of the dawn had receded, leaving behind an invitation to stillness and rest.